Good morning. Without losing any precious seconds, I'll just go directly into my presentation, which is another piece of research that I have conducted as part of my doctoral study on public water management project in a different part of the world, which is post-Soviet Union Central Asian country. So here I'm here to speak about methodology, which tackles the problem where I believe that the conceptual tools which are accepted widely for planning, implementing, and administering development projects may further embed inequalities into otherwise good programs. So in my study, I found the categories and conceptual frameworks through which projects are implemented and administered, they being inattentive to the diverse circumstances of people's lives, and to the negative outcomes for certain groups. The project I looked at was designed to improve access to irrigation water for everybody, and thus to increase agricultural production. The policy took place in Uzbekistan, and I have a small map here. In the rural parts of Uzbekistan, and you can see it's purple below Kazakhstan and Russia, and up Afghanistan, and you can see a small Aral Sea. I have a pointer here. Okay, there's an Aral Sea that is important for my study here. This particular area is undergoing increased scarcity of water due to the drying up of the Aral Sea. And Aral Sea used to be a large source of irrigation, and now there is only 10% of what it used to be. My research interrogated the differences that were built into the project, apparently without any such intent, between women and men's involvement, and eventually to women's unequitable access to water. So the focus here is on my research approach, which is called institutional ethnography, that opens up to view what actually happened and how it happened, making visible what official accounts tend to mystify. But first I'll describe the project and then explain some of the key features of institutional ethnography that underpin the particular approach I took to doing research. So again, my research is based in Uzbekistan, where water management continues to be a largely public, that is state-run and state-operated enterprise, with 60% of population living in rural areas engaged in irrigated agriculture. Water for agricultural irrigation is an increasingly important matter. My research took place in a very small village where water resources are really seriously depleting, and it's located at the end of the irrigated infrastructure, and issues of accessing this water is crucial for the inhabitants of this village, who are largely dependent upon this agriculture for their livelihoods and subsistence. The structure of rural population is characterized by two predominant groups. A small group of elite farmers, they're also called private farmers, and peasants. And this is how they are referred in all policy documents. So I'll use peasants referring to them as group. So both groups are the products of the Soviet system of agricultural governance and what came after as post-Soviet attempts to decentralize and privatize land and agrarian production. So these elite farmers, and they were 29 individuals in my village, were assigned farming rights in a very authoritarian manner to some of the former employees of the Soviet communal farms that were used to be some leaders of what they called brigades, agricultural brigades. These farmers they were kind of forced to sign contracts with the government, according to which they are obliged to submit all of their cotton produce and some of their wheat produce at the fixed price by the government to the government in exchange for free land tenure. Whereas the peasants emerged from the large body of employees at the former Soviet communal farms, and they were not chosen to become elite farmers by the local authorities. And there were about 11,000 people in my village. However, they were allocated plots of about 0.12 hectares to grow their own food. So the produce from these fields typically supply households with nearly all their subsistence needs. However, they provide little opportunities for cash income. As a result, most of the male peasants are engaged in wage labor outside of the country, and their income is apparently not reliable and sometimes insufficient, and so is any financial support for their homes back in the village. And some of these men find new families. Some of them never return back home, and in these circumstances, peasant women must work even harder to ensure that their fields are maximally productive and generate enough food to sustain their families. And at the same time, their access to irrigation water is quite limited. So my question was, how did it happen? Why is that in presence of the project to improve irrigation, women still continue experiencing difficulties? In order to seek answers to this question, I used institutional ethnography, which was founded by Dorothy Smith, and it's often described as feminist-inspired methodology. And so this approach advocates to approach knowing and learning about knowing from the ground up, beginning in ethnography, very much like you were talking about, and it builds analysis from what people know without relying or beginning from theoretical assumptions and theories. And it assumes that everyday life is put together by people, and they are socially organized or institutionally organized by relations of ruling. And these ruling relations are invisible, but they are there to be discovered and explicated. So she believes that social organization of ruling exists in material form, and it organizes what happens. So the task of institutional ethnographers is to track and explicate this social organization of any setting by looking at how people actually enact these ruling relations, which enter their lives through institutional practices. Development projects, as my study, are never separate from development institutions and from the relationships that rule them. And the task is to discover how things actually work. So the analysis proceeds from what is locally observable to the more invisible trans-local powers or forces that coordinate them. And inquiry moves from a problematic that is generated from the women's accounts to explicating of the ruling relations. When I first read all of this, I closed my book and went for a walk, and then I came back to it because it was absolutely not really clear from the first reading, but I hope with my data I'll explain better what these words mean. And this is a picture of a peasant woman, and this is her garden, her field. So I began with actually interviewing or living and observing in participatory way of how women peasants actually live their lives, living with one family and talking to other women. What I found was that irrigation water is definitely important for fundamental for their livelihoods, because more than 80% of their subsistence needs are covered by what they grow in their gardens and in their fields. However, their access to water is not only unreliable, it's uncertain and it's insufficient. And in most cases, women must catch the water, because the water is not continuously available. It only comes at certain periods of times for 3 days during a month, and they don't really. There are no reliable ways for them to access this information in a consistent way. And here are some of the excerpts they have. They either have to be at home all the time to be able to open up the ditch so the water flows, or yes, and of course this cannot be the case because they're very, very busy making sure that the families are still fed. And this is an account of another woman who says this is how she checks whether the water is there. So she takes 2 hours by the donkey harnessed cart to go and actually see whether there is, to go to the field and see whether there is water. So if there is water, she queues up and waits, and then she goes back. So it takes up one entire day for her. So if there is water, that's good. If there is no water, all this long journey is taken in vain. And this is just to illustrate how it is for them to struggle for water. And this is how the fields look when they miss the water to irrigate. So the water management project that I look at seemed to work quite well, because the documents and the reports say, well, this is really working. But women peasants were definitely left out, and the project staff failed to notice it. I keep looking at you because I fear there's this, and I haven't even gotten to my findings yet. So what I did, I went to this, the Water Users Association, which is the only organization in the village that works directly with water. And this is what the project was about. The project was about to establish the Water Users Associations throughout the country to improve irrigation for water. And they were introduced in 2000 as part of the reforms into the public system of irrigation water distribution, in a shift from the Soviet, very authoritarian and centralized, into less centralized way. And WUA were established as part of the national policies for improving, where they were put in place as alternative to state-owned or to privately run irrigation management units, which were focused on involving local communities. It was expected that this policy reform would contribute to the overall national agricultural strategy, which will ultimately facilitate poverty reduction and provide social assistance to the most vulnerable groups. So this was the rhetorics behind this policy. And the government of Uzbekistan enforced the establishment of the WUA throughout the countries, and its members were selected by local authorities, and technical staff were also assigned by local authorities, and they're still being closely supervised by the local authorities. And so moving from the women's accounts to discovering how it was possible that they were left out, I understood that how public water practices were organized actually institutionally organized women's experiences of exclusion. And I empirically studied the public irrigation, looking at how people at various levels were tied to the use of to the institution and the use of documents. And this is the WUA, and this is where I spent my summer talking to this men and actually looking and going with them into the fields. So here what was important was that I was interviewing them about what they do, what they actually do, what the work is actually constituted of, looking closely and detailing how they put together their everyday work life. And here it's important to note that the data was not reinterpreted or reassigned, but the data was taken as it is. And for me, as an analyst, it was important to sort of map together how each individual participant in this process was contributing differently to the process of putting the water practice together, and how they were situated differently. So it's putting together a map and looking for the sequences of actions in which a given particular work was connected to each other and to the larger institutional goals. And so of special importance were the institutional texts that were entering this work, and how this texts were coordinating the work of the staff. And this often happened without people knowing about this coordinating power of text, and this is exactly what Smith called the ruling relations. I'll skip that. So this is an excerpt from one of the interview with staff, and he's mentioning the document which is called the contour, and he says, like, this is when I do my work, I look at contours, and this is how I make sure that I do my work well. And this is my translated version of the contour, and as you can see, there's a lot of different categories, and in the end it has to be signed by all these people, and you can see the farmer in the end. So I learned that contours were only available for the farmers, and they were only relevant to the farmers' land, and the private farmers' land. And my question was, how is it that the contours were only about the farmers? And so I tracked up the system using the text and interviews where the contours at all came into being. And I came to the to the state expert and these large top profile documents about the agricultural production, and different documents in which it was affirmed that the agrarian land had to be reorganized into small private farms, and to support these private farms, water users associations were envisioned to rationally manage and use the water resources. And together with this policy on water, here came all the sample documents, standardized documents, how to run WUA well. And with these documents, it came charters, agreements between the WUA and the members, and contours. They came together with the establishment of the WUA. So, for example, this is some beginning sentences from the WUA charter, and it says, well, the WUA is supposed to do all of this. And as you can see in the second paragraph, it says distribution between WUA members. So member is an important part, because it turned out that membership is very important, and membership can be achieved by signing the agreement contract between the WUA and the member. So an agreement is the most important part. If there is an agreement, there is water. No agreement, no water, says the WUA chairman. And then here's the WUA accountant who explains that the peasants cannot enter the WUA agreement because they don't have stamps, like physical stamps. Why do they not have the stamps? It's because the private farmers were initially registered as independent, and having a stamp was essential for them to become actually farmers, because they become farmers through signing an agreement with the government, according to which they have to give their cotton. And peasants were created, on the contrary, as home consumption to alleviate food insecurity. And they were not expected to contribute to state agricultural export. And in this way, they were quite left out from the process, and they did not appear in all these documents. So here I was, this is to resume, that I began from the very end, from peasants, and kind of climbed up to the state-led agricultural expert, and 30% of Uzbekistan revenue comes from agricultural export, and this is the second largest cotton producer in the world, so it's very important for the state export. And in my conclusions, here I showed how I used my methodology to explore how things actually work, to generate how misunderstandings or challenges in the everyday lives are actually being shaped from outside, from the forces which are not really readily available for us to see. And unfortunately, I do not have any policy recommendations, because this is not what I planned to do, but I hope that my insights could be useful for those who are there in good places to formulate policies. Yes, thank you.